This month, I got a little crazy. I decided I should see if I could read 40 books in the 40 days of Lent. Welcome to Explore Your Enthusiasm, episode 251 with me, Tara Swiger. Most weeks in the show, we talk about how you are building a business, what it feels like to build a business, the mindset you need, the confidence, and the practicalities like paying yourself, marketing your work, and feeling good about your productivity. Once a month, because of popular demand, I share with you what I'm reading that month. And this month, I got a little crazy. So for those of you who don't follow along on my vlog, which you can find over on YouTube, every Monday I post a new video about what's going on in my life and business. For those of you who haven't been over there, I don't think I've said it here on the podcast, our most recent foster placement, who I've been calling Honey online, she went home to her family earlier this month on the 7th. And when she did, I made a big list of projects that, since there's not a baby in my house, I could work on. Now, one of them is recording and planning episodes of this podcast and my business stuff, but also fun projects like quilting and reading. And I was listening to some podcast about reading, and they talked to somebody who set a goal to read 40 books in 40 days. And I was like, Lent just started. So for those of you who don't know, Lent starts on Ash Wednesday and it goes through Easter Sunday. It represents, well, a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people, but usually the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert being tempted. And it is like a time of preparing yourself for the most important holiday, Easter. So a lot of times people give things up for Lent, but you can really do anything to help prepare yourself for Easter. And hearing about 40 days and 40 books, I was like, Lent is 40 days and I need a reset on my reading, on my mindset, on my confidence, on my time. Having a 2-year-old for 3 months is super intense. And then having her, bam, leave, be there one day, not be there the next is also super intense. And reading is super healing for me. For you, it might be something else. So let me see if I can read 40 books, like a book a day, basically. I have not been keeping at a book a day, but I'm super close. So in this week's, or this month's What I'm Reading update, I've got a lot of books for you. Are you ready? It's a lot of books. Okay, so we are going, I kind of broke it down, not by order that I read them, but in, with the one I like the most at the top, and then kind of in sections. So up first is nonfiction. The book that I loved the most this month is Brown, White, Black by Nishta Mehra. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the cover right now. If you're watching in the podcast, you will find links to everything over at taraswiger.com/podcast251. You'll find links to all of these books so you can get them. I link them up on Amazon, but you can buy them from your local bookstore. Go to indiebound.org, or I get them from my library. So this is a library book. It's called Brown, White, Black, An American Family at the Intersection of Race, Gender, Sexuality, and Religion. This is the story of a brown woman, an Indian woman, who is in a relationship with a white woman. Now they're married and they adopted a black son. And it's a collection of essays about all of those relationships. It's my favorite bits are about motherhood and adoption and kind of the way that our society looks at motherhood as a biological affair, even though it's mostly an emotional relationship, and how our language about the biology of motherhood and placing motherhood in like biological terms really doesn't do a good job of describing what many of us experience as motherhood outside of biology. So I shared some of the bits of it on Instagram. If you're not following me on my Instagram stories, you are missing out on a daily update on what I'm reading. But it's really beautiful, beautifully written, beautiful story. It really comes down to love, right? So it's intersection of race, gender, sexuality, and religion, and it comes back to love. And just like the power of love to take random people and make them a family. It's really beautiful. So the next nonfiction book I read that I really liked was In Conclusion, Don't Worry About It by Lauren Graham. So this is really like a great little graduation gift for a graduate in your life. It is a speech based on a speech that Lauren Graham, who you might know from Gilmore Girls or Parenthood, she gave at her alma mater, her high school, and then she kind of worked on it and developed it into a book. I got the audiobook of this from my libraries. I've talked about it before, and I'll link it up in the show notes, but it's Libby. So Libby is an app that lets you look up books, and you hook up your library account and then your library card, and you can rent them from the library or borrow them from the library, ebooks and audiobooks. So this is the first time I did an audiobook. It worked beautifully. And I rented the audiobook because I wanted to hear Lauren read it. Also because I had so many flights this last week. I went to San Diego on Monday and I came back on Thursday. I needed, I love to listen to podcasts, but because my goal is to read more books this month, I was like, I should get some books to listen to when I'm on the plane and I can't get to my book, as opposed to just podcasts. I should put some books in my ears. So In Conclusion, Don't Worry About It, read by Lauren Graham, is awesome. The second audiobook I'm reading that I'm not quite through yet is Things I Know for Sure by Oprah Winfrey. That's also a collection of essays. I have a hard time sometimes listening to fiction on audiobook, and then sometimes nonfiction if there's dull parts. So I like this collection of essays is a little easier because I can keep pausing it and coming back to it. It's the kind of book you would pick up, and read one at a time. So I also borrowed from Libby, but read on my Kindle, A Life in Stitches, Knitting My Way Through Love, Loss, and Laughter by Rachel Herron. Now, disclosure, I know Rachel Herron. We were in a mastermind together for a while, and I have followed her online forever. She is a writer. She's a knitter. But her career is she's an author of all kinds of novels, including ones. The Cypress Hollow series follows knitters. It is like a romance novel for knitters, and there's a whole collection of them. So this was kind of her memoir, biography, and essays. Is really beautiful. Every chapter is about a different knitted thing and kind of where she was in her life through that. So through falling in love, through losing a parent, through her relationship with her sisters, through moving into different apartments and growing up. It's just a beautifully written collection of essays that you are going to love if you're a knitter, or really any kind of crafter. And you should definitely buy it for the knitter in your life. I feel like this month I read more books that are memoir / collection of essays than I usually do. I don't know if it's because, I don't know why that is, but I'm liking it. Now, so fiction. So I read quite a few. I'm trying to think of what books I have here to actually show you the covers of. So I'm going to start with the one that is the weirdest, and that's The Mere Wife by Maria Davana Headley. So Maria Davana Headley, that's probably what it is. The Mere Wife is a retelling of Beowulf, which you guys know Beowulf, one of the oldest stories that we have. It is retold and reset. It's told by the, it's a weird one. It's set in modern day suburbia America. And it's told from the perspective of the mother of the monster. So, Beowulf is a story of a strapping young man loved by his community who takes on the monster and the monster's mother. It's weird. So my husband loves Beowulf. It's one of his favorite stories. He was a history major. He's into Beowulf. I feel kind of fuzzy about what Beowulf was about. I definitely read it in high school. And The Mere Wife is kind of like magical realism. There's a lot that you think is kind of magical or mystical going on, and then it ends up maybe it's not. And it's a lot about perspective. Something's a monster if we see it as a monster, and we might not be seeing it the right way. So it's very interesting. I liked it. It's a short little book. It's kind of both creepy and magical and beautifully written, written like poetry, like Beowulf. I think you'll like it. So I also read, this was another one I loved, First Impressions, a novel of old books, unexpected love, and Jane Austen by Charlie Lovett. So First Impressions is a novel about Jane Austen's original draft of Pride and Prejudice. There is mystery, there is a little bit of falling in love, there is a lot of old books and old bookstores. So if you are also a reading nerd, First Impression is like a book for reading nerds. It moves quickly, it is fun. There's some like suspense towards the end, but it's mostly just like a fun look at what is possibly Jane Austen's first draft of Pride and Prejudice. I also read Convenience Store Woman. Now, this was part of my Read Harder challenge for 2019. I'll link it up in the show notes. It's put on by bookriot.com, the Read Harder challenge. They give you 24 prompts of books to read that you might not normally read. And so Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata is a book written by a woman, translated by a woman. And that was one of the challenges, was to read a book either written or translated by a woman, and this is both. So Convenience Store Woman, fairly sure it was originally in Japanese. It follows the story of a neurodiverse woman. You're not quite sure what's going on with her, but she definitely sees the world in a different way. She has a hard time like pretending to be human and having human emotion. And she finds her place in a convenience store, and she feels like she's a part of something, and it makes her feel, a part of a larger community. But of course, she gets a lot of judgment from her high school friends and family for not wanting more, for not wanting to for not having ambition to move on to a better career or to settle down and get married and rely on her husband. And you can see some cultural differences here between how we think about those things and how the Japanese think about those things. And then she makes some decisions so that she'll do what people want her to do, but that take her out of the thing that really she's found love for. What's interesting is when I read the reviews of this after I finished reading it, a lot of people talk about how funny it is. I think I missed that it was supposed to be funny. But it is definitely like very, it's written from her perspective. So there's a lot of things that are funny in her pragmatism and like her practicality of how she's looking at it. She's looking at it without a lens of emotion or really understanding like societal expectations and what those are built from. So it is funny, and it is a little weird, and it's definitely a really interesting look at how somebody who's neurodiverse is operating in their society. So I read a couple mystery suspense thrillers, which, by the way, over on my Goodreads, I started a new shelf to put all those together because it's something in the year or two of me sharing this with you each month, I realize I'm reading more and more fiction. I started reading mostly nonfiction. I mean, here where I share it with you, I was starting reading mostly nonfiction. But so one of the sections of fiction I've been liking more and more are like mysteries or thrillers or novels of suspense. And in that category this month, I just finished yesterday on the plane, The Lies We Told by Camilla Way. This was the October 2018 Book of the Month Club book that I chose. Those of you who don't know, the Book of the Month Club is you pay a flat fee. I think it's in between $10 or $14, and you get a book every month. And they give you a selection of 4 to 5 books to choose from, and the books are on all different kinds of books. So there's always like a suspense thriller, there's usually a debut novel, there's usually a historical fiction, and there's usually a pick that's literary fiction. So I don't always choose a Book of the Month Club pick. You can always skip that month and you won't be charged. And if you were already charged, your credits will roll forward. What I tend to do with these books is I save them up for when I'm going on a trip. I read them on the plane, and then I just leave them somewhere. If I can find a little free library, which, if you guys know about Little Free Library, you can find out more at littlefreelibrary.com. I'll link it up in the show notes. I'll leave them there. Sometimes I just leave them at the airport with a note like, you can take this, or my hotel room. Especially if you're staying in an Airbnb, they usually have a shelf of books. In some older hotels, they'll have like a shelf of books that you can take. I'll just leave the book there. I don't have to carry it home. Well, I didn't read this one until my flight home, so it got all the way home with me. But it's I like doing that because it keeps me from taking library books on my trip with me, and I'm always paranoid my Kindle is going to die. And so even though I take books on Kindle, I always have to have like an actual book with me. So this was the actual book I took. It's called The Lies We Tell by Camilla Way. It is a twisty suspense told in 2 different timelines following a troubled young family, and especially the daughter in the family, and a girlfriend whose boyfriend has gone missing. And how those stories intersect, you find out about 3/4 of the way through, and then it kind of all falls apart, and of course there's a big twist at the end. I feel like this is like a lot of the other suspense thrillers I've read it's not particularly amazing. It's not one of those that made me that blew my mind, like The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware did. This is just like, okay. It was fun. It was gripping enough that I kept reading it all the way through. It was well written. It's not something that I would call a favorite, but if you like these novels and you're looking for more, definitely get this one. Her first book, Camilla Way's first book, I think it's called Looking for Edie or Finding Edie. It has even higher reviews, so I might go check that out. She's a great writer. Also was Wish You Were Here by Rita Mae Brown. This is an old school mystery novel. So this I read because the Read Harder Challenge, one of the challenges was to read a book where an animal is a point of view character, meaning like they narrate some of the story, and which is never something I would normally ever pick up. And another challenge was to read a cozy mystery. So a cozy mystery, in case you don't know, because I didn't, is a mystery where there's not a lot of violence, there's not blood, guts, gore, and it all ends up okay. And so like the Miss Marple is like a classic cozy mystery series. I actually love to watch British cozy mysteries on TV. So I tend to like these kinds of mysteries, but this one did not do it for me. It might be that it's old. It's old. It was published in the 90s. It claims that the author's cat, Rita Mae Brown's cat, is one of the co-authors. There's a picture of her on the back cover. And one of the characters, 2 of the characters in it who share their thoughts, you can like see their thoughts, are a corgi and the cat of the main heroine, I guess, and they help her solve a mystery of what's happening in their town. Of course, there are deaths, and the cat and the corgi can smell better than she can, which they judge her pretty harshly for, and they help her solve the mystery. It was okay. It was pretty slow. Like one of the things I read after I finished it, I was like, what did I not like about this book? And when I'm not sure what I didn't like, I tend to read some reviews and see what other people said about it. One of the things I read that really explains what I didn't care for is she does lots of slice of Southern life, quirky characters in this quirky Southern town, like scene setting before anything gets underway. So it's slow to start, and then I just don't care for Southern town quirkiness. I live in a Southern town. I'm usually mostly offended by the characterizations of writers when they're like, oh, it's set in a sleepy Southern town. They're usually talking about a town somewhere near me, and the characterization is usually like everybody's idiots, and I don't care for it. Or they judge those big city people. Like, it's just not, I just never usually like reading that. It's usually badly done. Rita Mae Brown's a fine author, a fine writer. It's finely written, but I didn't love it. I won't be picking up any more of her books, even though I know she's like a superstar. She's written like a zillion books. And this is a series, the Sneaky Pie Brown series are, I'll have this cat and this corgi solving mysteries. If that sounds like your kind of thing, I think you'd love it. If you love cozy mysteries, if you love cats and dogs, like that I didn't mind. It's funny, I minded more the characterization of like small town Southerners than I minded like reading a corgi's thoughts, because corgis are amazing. Like, who doesn't want to know what they're thinking about? So that was Wish You Were Here by Rita Mae Hayworth. Not Rita Mae Hayworth, Rita Mae Brown. Rita Hayworth, somebody else entirely. And another kind of very atmospheric, mysterious book I read was, it's a big book. There were a lot of holds on it on my library, is Transcription by Kate Atkinson. So you might remember a couple months ago, I read the Jackson well, I read Case Histories by Kate Atkinson, which is a Jackson Brody mystery. I tried to read a couple more in that series, and I didn't like them as much as I liked Case Histories. Kate Atkinson also wrote Life After Life, which I haven't read yet. Transcription is the story of, we don't really know. She works for the BBC now, and she flashes back, like some of the chapters are set back in the 40s during the World War II. So she was conscripted to work for the British secret service, like the CIA, which I think is MI5. And she just is a transcriptionist. She's just typing up what she's hearing in meetings. And you're not quite sure how far into MI5 she is, like what level of spy she is. She's real young when she gets started, but her modern day self seems to be having this weird, mysterious series of events going on with people that she knows acting like they don't know her. And it's causing her to remember what she went through during the war. And so those stories kind of both unfold at the same time. And it's beautifully written. It's rich in detail, especially the stuff set in the 40s, and rich characterization. Her inner life is what a lot of the book is about. And kind of when it flashes back to the 40s, like how naive she was then about the work she was doing, the men that she met, and that it's really cool to be in her head, and it's very atmospheric. There's a lot of like mystery and gloomy skies. It was a little slow for me. Like halfway through, I was like, I don't think I'm going to finish reading this because I'm like, what's happening? I don't know what's happening. And this is actually how Kate Atkinson's other books that I've read are, is that there's mysteries and you're kind of following the story and everything is unfolding. Several different things are unfolding at the same time in different timelines. And then you start to figure out what it is, and then it explains it, but there's no big twist. There's no big, it's just like, oh, okay, wow, that resolved. So a mystery, but not suspenseful. That's what I'd say. So I also read a bunch of quilting books. By the way, for those of you who some feedback I get sometimes is, oh, you said you were going to read, or you read 100 books last year, but a lot of those books were crafting books or cookbooks or comics. And I count everything. Anything you read counts. So whether it's an audiobook or it's a crafting book or it's a cooking book, everything you read counts. Because also when I say I read a quilting book, I actually read like the written parts. Obviously there are patterns and I don't like read through the pattern, but I will if they're doing something interesting I don't already know about. So one that had a lot of good information that I read was Fussy Cutters Club by Ian G. Wilson. So it's a boot camp for mastering fabric play. So fussy cutting is cutting fabric where you're paying attention to the print or design that you're cutting. So it's like centralizing a specific piece of the design. Maybe it's a flower, maybe it's a teacup. Maybe you're cutting in a way that when you put the things together, they'll create a new pattern. And she talks about how to do that. So she talks about selecting patterns for fussy cutting, how to use novelty prints. There's a lot about how to work with florals, how to look at the print repeat, the different tools you might use. And then she goes into how to do different kinds of fussy cutting. Super, super informative. I use fussy cutting techniques for my EPP, my English paper piecing projects, because I think it looks really cool to have one thing repeated around a rosette. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, go over to my Instagram. One of the most recent pictures is sure to be my EPP projects. You can also follow the hashtag, and I'll link it up, La Pasagalia quilt, or it's called, that's one hashtag. The hashtag I use is Tara La Pas quilt, because it's my La Pasagalia quilt. You can see all of the photos I've posted. I do quite a bit of fussy cutting. This book has been on my list forever because I follow Angie Wilson online, and she has a tutorials that taught me how to do what I do. So I'm super happy to find it at my library. I also reread this book that I had read a little bit when I bought it from my mom a couple years ago, but we went to QuiltCon this month, in Nashville, and we met the author, Sherry Lynn Wood. So her book is The Improv Handbook for Modern Quilters, A Guide to Creating, Quilting, and Living Courageously. I saw this at my library years ago. I bought it for my mom back in 2016, and I flipped through it then, and then I brought it home just now after QuiltCon and seriously read through it and started actually doing some improv quilting. So it's not a pattern book. It's a book that talks about how to think about improvisation and how to think about how to put color together and basically all of the different things you can do with quilting. And she gives you directions for ways to start the improv process. And she has different exercises, different ways of doing things, like to make your improv, just like a bunch of different ideas and things to think about as you're doing it. So this is one of my favorite pieces. This is what made me find the book to begin with. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. It's called, Get Your Curve On, and it's all these improv pieced curved pieces. So I love this book, Improv Handbook for Modern Quilters by Sherry Lynn Wood. It is so good if you want to relax a little bit about your quilting. And my quilting, come to find out, has always been improv. I've only once ever followed a pattern. What I usually do is cut up fabric, sew it together, then figure out how it's all going to fit together. I've been improving. I didn't even know it. So those are some of the books I read so far this month. I shared with you 11 books that I read. I read others that I didn't love, and I thought, I don't want to talk about them. You can find all the books I read over at my Goodreads, which is linked up from the show notes. You can find all of the books I linked to, including where you can find them on Amazon or IndieBound, over at taraswiger.com/podcast251, because this is episode 251. You can also search anything you're looking for at taraswiger.com. Just there's a little search bar on the side, so put in any of the titles of the books and you will find the show notes if you're listening to this later. If you're watching this over on the podcast, it would really help if you would leave a review. So just right there from your podcast app, hit the 5 stars, make a little comment about what you love. That helps other people find it. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for being here. You got to see the book covers. If you hit the thumbs up on this video and leave a comment, that helps other people find it. If you like these bookish shows, let me know. I love talking about books. I've been sharing them a little bit over on Instagram stories. If you want to hear more of that, follow me there and tell me in the comments below that you want to hear more about books or whatever you want to hear more about. I make this podcast for you, so I want to talk about what is going to help you in your business and your life. Thank you so much for listening. I wish you lots of reading. Next month, I'll be back with a bigger list of books probably, because I'm continuing to try to read 40 books in 40 days. Wish me luck. Come cheer me on over on Instagram. And I wish you lots of reading time and an enthusiastic day.